Welcome to Hanging Out with Robert, that's me. This video contains things that I encounter throughout the day. If for some reason I complete a task and you would like to see the details, you can click on the link in the description area below. This video also contains tips and tricks that I learned throughout the years. I plan on leaving this video accessible for about 30 days. After that, you can view it through my Patreon account. Thank you very much for watching. In this video, I'm going to be replacing the intake manifold because the one in my car is busted. If you look at the intake manifold, this end of it has a vacuum nipple, and that vacuum nipple is actually attached to a disc. That disc on my car is loose. You can shake it and you can hear it vibrate. Sometimes they pop out, and if you got a turbo car, well, any car combustion engine, it needs a tight vacuum and boost system. That thing pops out, it'll probably render you parked on the side of the road waiting for a tow truck. So I found this one loose. I'm gonna go ahead and replace it in this video. I think it's just as easy to replace it than try to fix it. First thing you do is pop the hood, go inside the car, pull the release, pull this out. Man, that thing is tight on that side. Something's going on. Got both of the latches to release. Pull this out a little bit and lift the hood up. Takes two hands. I don't know what's going on with that latch. That latch didn't pop first time. However, I'm also missing my cap off my headlight. Not sure where that went. It was on there yesterday. Interesting. And I installed this cable stuff yesterday because I had this radiator stuff loose. So I better be careful I don't lose my ability to open my hood. That would suck. First thing I suggest you do is disconnect your negative battery cable, because you'll be working under the intake manifold getting stuff loose, and if you short out the starter power lead, you can short something out in the car. So get a 10mm, take that loose, move that out of the way. After you disconnect the battery, you may want to lay a towel across this front clip cowl, because a lot of them are made of fiberglass, and that fiberglass gets in your arms. It's itchy. The intake manifold that I am installing is a NA non-turbo intake manifold. You can primarily tell that because it has one port here instead of two or three, and this hole is larger on a NA manifold than it is on a turbo. If you have a T5, some people enlarge their intake. The tuners say it doesn't matter. There's a myth that it does. If you put a larger intake throttle body on there, you can get more air in there, and thus giving yourself more air, more power. However, when you're dealing with turbo boosting, that pressure, your PSI of your turbo boost pressure, is what gives it more air. The tuner says that little bit of opening being larger is not really going to do it for you. Anyway, that's what one I'm going to put on. So I got the battery disconnected. I'm going to move this tube out of the way. Next, you want to disconnect your idle air control valve. Disconnect your throttle body down there because you're pulling this all the way out. Then you want to disconnect your throttle body inlet hose. Pull that hose. Normally it'll wrap around to go into your intercooler, so you want to disconnect it from the intercooler. If you have a rip kit like I have, I'm going to go ahead and move this pipe totally out of the way. Then I'm going to bleed the fuel pressure off the car. The car's been sitting overnight. It may not have a lot, but I'm going to bleed that fuel pressure off because I got to remove the rail from the intake manifold. Now, you could do it two ways. You could leave it connected to the wire harness and disconnect the fuel lines, or you could disconnect the fuel lines and leave the wire harness. So I'm going to disconnect the wire harness and leave the fuel lines connected. As you can see in my charge pipe, let me put a flash on this. You can see oil in there, oil in there, oil down in there. It is totally normal to have some oil residue in there. this pipe and all of your turbo boost piping unfortunately gets saturated with air that is moist with oil vapors. Part of the PCV design to capture the oil in the vapor of the PCV system. So you will get oil in that piping and in your intercooler and on and on and on. It shouldn't be a lot, but it's normal to see a little bit. I have the fan mod, so I have a little extra room, about an inch or so, inch and a quarter with my fan modification. So I don't have to remove my fan to get it out of the way. So the next thing I'm going to do is take the piping loose there and here to get this to move a little bit out of the way of my throttle body and intake manifold. Next, you could push the vacuum lines off of the vacuum tree. The little lines that go to something. Try not to break any of the nipples, so pull them straight off. If you don't pull them straight off, push them straight off, you torque them to the side, they'll snap right off. Try to remember where those lines go. This one's going to my boost gauge, this one's going to my bypass, that one's going to my ECU for tuning, and this one's going to my fuel pressure regulator. Now you want to remove these 4 10mm screws to get the throttle control off of the intake manifold. Sad to say, those break a lot, so try not to break them. If you break them, you're going to have a bad day. It's real important that they're not broke in your good manifold. And it looks like all of them came out of my good manifold. So I'm going to spray lubricant in there before I put those back in. You need to remove these so that you can attach them to your replacement throttle body bracket. Now I'm going to remove this tube here going down to my turbo stuff, because I gotta get this stuff detached from the manifold. I remove this screw out of the vacuum tree because it's good to get the vacuum tree out of the way before you try to remove these other 2 screws, because you don't want to be manhandling your vacuum tree. Then I got that screw back there. These screws don't have to be super tight, just snug them down when you put them in. Next, you pull your fuel rail wire tails off. You just jerk it up, set it out of the way. I'm going to unplug my fuel injector wires, and then I'll be able to lift this stuff up and set it aside. If you are not going to disconnect your wires, you need to pull that 8mm bolt out of there. But whenever you unplug your fuel injectors, try to not lose the little rubber gaskets that go in the sockets of them. I'll show you one in a second. You push on the fuel injector latch, the plug latch, to release it. So you push this in and then you unplug it, and down in there's a little white gasket. So try not to lose those. So I'm gonna unplug the other 4 and lift this up and swing it out of the way. Before I can move this out of the way, everything's disconnected except for this linkage. I have to pop this linkage loose, or you can unbolt the throttle body and pull it all off together. Sometimes when you pop these loose, they lose their ability to snap on and work right, and then you'll find yourself coasting around and not having any throttle response because this is broken loose. But I normally put a screwdriver in, pop it loose down there, pry it off. My throttle body linkage popped off so easy, it was scary. I don't know if that's going to snap back on real good. Next, you can take the 4 bolts out of the throttle body. They're 10mm. The hardest part of this job is getting this vacuum hose loose from this stem here. So I'm going to loosen that clamp and try to pull this off. Sometimes these are so hard you can't really get them back on there, and that needs to be on there good. That's your brake booster vacuum. Then I can pull this off. So let me take these 4 bolts out of there. You can unplug that throttle body right there, your TPS. I now have all 4 screws out of my throttle body. It just pops off. Now this throttle party does have a gasket, and you do want to replace that gasket. Also, you see all that oil gummed up in there. This would be a good time to clean that throttle body gasket. Another thing I'm going to mention is this vacuum tree. It has a gasket on there. That little rubber gasket, that is a source of a boost leak. Very common boost leak. Mine have been replaced in the past. It may be able to be replaced again. So be aware of that just in case you want to replace that gasket as well. So next I'm going to disconnect this line here, and then I'm going to pull these two screws out of the fuel rail, and I'm going to use a tool to pry from here under there and pop this fuel rail up and out of the intake manifold. So to get this fuel rail out of the way, I removed these two screws, and I removed this bracket back here. It's got a T25 in it. That way the lines will move and get out of the way of the intake manifold. Next, if you have the engine cover on top of the spark plugs, you need to get that cover off, because you need to take your PCV hose loose, because that threads through the intake manifold. So I went on ahead and took that loose. As you can see, I lifted the fuel rail up just a little bit, resting it on the cylinder head. That's enough to get the intake manifold off. Next thing I'm going to do is take the 12 millimeter from the dipstick. You put the tool on there and you twist it toward the radiator this way to get it loose. And then there's a bracket under there, a little further, that you can reach down under there and feel. It has a 12 millimeter bolt on it as well. If that bolt is still in there, you have to pull that. So let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. You got the bolt there for the intake manifold, and there's a bracket back there a little further that you have to get the 12 millimeter out of there. Those don't have to be super tight when you put them in, but people tighten them up real tight when they install them. As you can see, there are the two bolts. The one on the left came out of the dipstick. The one on the right came out of the manifold support bracket. One is longer than the other. Now I can remove these top three bolts. One here, one there. And then I could loosen the lower four bolts about 4 or 5 turns. You got one here, one behind this tube there, and then one down under the manifold back there. I'm going to put the arrow on it. Take those 4 loose, then the manifold will be ready to come out, provided that you pull this hose here. Now I don't remove this hose unless I'm replacing the manifold, and there's normally a bracket right there holding down your PCV tube, but I have the P2 PCV tube, or the PCV tube for the RN engine there, aluminum one. Had I have known that, I would have replaced that with some other kind of tubing that was a little fatter, because my car is tuned and it needs to breathe better. So that's not the preferred tube for a car that's tuned. This bolt here on the corner usually requires a universal. A 1/4 inch is the one I normally use, but since the throttle body is off, I can reach it with a 3/8 inch. That one, a universal, is good to have down there on the bottom. The one down there on the bottom of the universal is good to have. This one down here on the end, hidden away back there, I never use a universal on that. I just put long extensions on it. Take those bottom 4 loose, totally remove the top 3. This bolt tucked away, I used a long 9-inch extension, then put another 2 or 3 inches on there, so 12 inches of extension. Screw it out a few turns. That should be good. So now I need to remove these top 3, and I'm ready to lift the manifold up and out of the car. But when I lift it up and out, I got to remember I got this vacuum hose plugged into the side of it. So I don't want to jerk it up. I just want to move it over to the driver's side a little bit, reach in here and undo this hose, because I don't want to damage anything on the PCV. Now that the intake manifold is lifted up and out of the way, I can remove these other 4 bolts so I can put a new intake manifold gasket on there. I strongly recommend you install a new intake manifold gasket. Check your PCV stuff, make sure that stuff is still connected good. If you have this bolt in the back of your starter, I recommend you remove that like mine is removed. It's a 12 millimeter. That bolt will hinder your starter replacements. And you can look down here for stuff that may have fallen down there and remove stuff. Make sure your wiring still looks good and your PCV stuff is still good. I have this modded PCV P2 hose on here, so that's why mine looks like that. So when I put my new intake manifold on there, I gotta go ahead and zip tie that thing on there so it don't slide off. So remove those 4 screws, take the gasket off, set the replacement one in place, and start putting this stuff back together. As I mentioned, on mine, this hose had come off the end, so I went to put it back on, and when I went to put it back on, I thought I heard this thing clicking. I heard something clicking, but, oh, there it goes. That thing is moving in and out. Probably would not have come out. I see these stakes in there, so it's probably okay. However, that's likely a boost leak, the fact that it's moving. Air gets out of there. I've always liked my intake manifolds black. This is aluminum. My mechanic at Nordic strongly suggested that I not paint my replacement one black. He said that that black will hold heat, and that's heating up your intake temperatures. And if you're trying to get performance, because you got tuning, that defeats your efforts to get performance, because you got hotter air because this intake manifold's painted black. So I'm gonna take my other one, clean it up, not paint it black, and install it. I'm looking at this intake and I see where they staked it. There, 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 there. I believe that's all to prevent this from coming out in case it gets loose like it is now. However, the one I have, I think I got from a 96 850. It's not staked like this one. So I think they learned something for 97. This is probably a 97 intake manifold. Maybe a 98 intake manifold off of a 98 SRV 70. So if you're going to the salvage yard and you have a choice, try to find a NA intake manifold off of a SRV 70 that will fit on your 850. That way you get one that is hopefully staked on the end. The one that I have to replace it does not have the stakes in the end of it. Got this intake manifold cleaned up. Not shining any more than that. It's cleaned up enough to be installed. So let me get on that and see what else I get done today. If you feel that this information was useful, please like it and share it with your social media friends. You can subscribe to my channel so that you will get notifications of future videos that I post. You can follow me on Twitter, and if you need to contact me directly, please visit my website. And if you have any questions, leave them below, and someone or myself will reply to them. Again, thank you very much for watching.